everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you saw in the title of this week's video, we are going to be doing a classics book recommendation video, but not just any classics book recommendation video, a video where we go through every single level. So I'm giving you classics for beginners, intermediate, and expert. So no matter where you fall in your classics journey, I'm gonna have a book for you, or multiple actually. And when I was planning out this video, I realized that there were so many books that I wanted to talk about that this is gonna be part one of like 3. So we are gonna have some of my classic book recommendations for every level today, but we're gonna have more installments of this series coming soon because I simply could not talk about all of the classics that I want to talk about in just one video. And lastly, before we jump into the classics, these breakdowns are very much my opinion and based on my experience. So the books for beginners for me were generally very easy to understand and so on and so forth. So if you feel differently about these rankings, let me know in the comment section down below, but just know that this is, again, based on my own personal experience and yeah, all that jazz. So we are going to be starting off with the beginner category. So if you have never touched a classic in your life, you have been very intimidated by classics up to this point, these are going to be the books for you. Some of them very popular, you've probably heard of. Other books that I'm going to talk about, totally underrated, under the radar. You literally may have never heard of them in your life, but they're great. The first classic for beginners that we are going to be talking about is a very popular one, and that is The Great Gatsby by Scott F. Fitzgerald. This follows our main character and our narrator, Nick, who finds himself deeply intertwined in the wealth of New York City in the 20s. And Nick has this neighbor who lives next to him, Jay Gatsby. You've probably never heard of him before. And this book really explores the allure of wealth and the price of longing. There's a lot of longing in this book. And I feel like for what it is, it's so short, but it's so fun and entertaining, and you get to know all the characters pretty well. I really love this classic, and I think if you are scared and parties and wealth in New York in the 20s sound fun to you, give it a shot because it's a good one. The next book for beginners that I want to talk about today is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. This follows the story of, you'll literally never guess, Siddhartha, who is on the journey for enlightenment. It takes place in ancient India, and Siddhartha is pretty much leaving his life of comfort behind to go out and again discover what enlightenment looks like, how that can impact him and his everyday life. And of course, along the way, he meets new friends, wise teachers. And honestly, if you guys have ever read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, or you really like classics or stories that follow a character who is on a journey of some kind to learn something about themselves, I feel like Siddhartha is a wonderful story. And again, this classic is very short, the writing is easy to comprehend, and it's generally a very enjoyable read. This next book that I want to talk about in the beginner category is one of those books that I find to be completely underrated, but it's wonderful for beginners. And that book is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. And this book follows the story of our main character named Charlie, who right at the beginning of the story, we know that he has a lower IQ. He's not the smartest guy. And we're reading from Charlie's perspective through his journal entries. And he undergoes this experimental surgery that's basically trying to increase his IQ, make him a lot smarter. But at the same time that Charlie is undergoing this experimental surgery, he is bonding with a cutie little lab rat named Algernon, who is also undergoing the same experimental surgery. And I feel like the commentary in this book is beautiful. This is also a bit of a sad one, and I really enjoy the way that we dive into our characters, but specifically Charlie in this book, because again, we watch him change as a character through directly in his journal entries. And I don't really hear people talk about this book, and I read this when I was a bit younger, but it has really stuck with me since then, and it is great for beginners, but have your tissues ready. That is all I'm gonna say. That's your warning. Okay. Now we are back to another popular classic, but I had to put this in this video, and that book is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I had to just get this out of the way, okay? I was gonna get people commenting left and right if I didn't put The Picture of Dorian Gray in my first installment of this series. And The Picture of Dorian Gray, the writing is very easy to understand. It's very accessible. I find that sometimes the setting was a little bit difficult for me to keep track of at times, but overall this is very, very approachable for beginners. There aren't too many characters to keep track of. The plot is pretty straightforward. And in this story, we are following, again, you'll never guess, none other than Dorian Gray. And Dorian Gray, to put it lightly, in this book is essentially the sexiest man alive. He is a good looking dude and he freaking knows it. He's obsessed with his vanity, and at the beginning of our story, this beautiful portrait gets painted of Dorian Gray. And again, this man is obsessed with his vanity and his sexiness. And so he's like, dang, I really wish that like I could just stay young and beautiful forever, and this beautiful painting of me could age instead. And let's just say that this wish that he makes at the beginning of our story, it plays a strong role in where this book goes. And again, I felt like the exploration of vanity in here was very, very interesting. And I also really, really appreciated the way that this story was able to take turns that I didn't see coming. I feel like as a modern reader, I don't really associate classics with having a ton of plot twists, like maybe Shakespeare, but like other than that, I don't think of classics that way. This book takes us on some twisty turny roads, and I really, really enjoyed this classic, and yeah, it's a great starting point for beginners. Okay guys, we only have 2 more left in our beginner category, and I'm gonna keep chugging along. And the next book that I have to talk to you about is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This book is a futuristic dystopian story that follows our main character, what's his name? Guy Montag, that is it. It follows our main character, Guy Montag, who he's starting to question the way that society is run. And to put it lightly, to put it simply without spoiling anything, this dystopian futuristic world that he is living in, books are illegal, wrong, bad. And the firemen, they don't put out fires, they go and set fire to books if they find any. And Guy is like, that's kind of oppressive. That's kind of actually not good for promoting independent thought. Do you know what I'm saying? And if you guys have ever read anything by George Orwell, Animal Farm, 1984, I feel like the thematic ideas in this book are very, very similar. So if you guys like messaging like that, questioning the government, questioning who we can trust, all that kind of stuff, I feel like this is a really, really fun one. And again, very easy to understand, very few pages, wonderful for beginners. Then lastly, but certainly not least, we have another, in my opinion, I don't know if tearjerker is the right word, but just like a constant tone of sadness. We have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is something else. Her books are chef's kiss, so good. And in this story, we are following our main character named Pecola, who is an African-American girl living in the 1940s. And her biggest dream in life is to have blue eyes. She thinks if she had blue eyes, it would make her beautiful, it would make her desirable. And you're really looking at a world that celebrates whiteness and finds beauty in whiteness. And you know, these blue eyes become a symbol of all these societal racist problems. And I really, again, enjoyed this book. And I feel like in its content, this isn't great for beginners. However, in your ability to understand the plot functionally and understand what's going on in the book, it is good for beginners. I do find that with Toni Morrison's work, you get more out of it with the more work you put into it. So again, while this is easy to understand as a beginner into classics, do some analysis of it when you're done. Do some reading on it afterwards, because I feel like you'll enjoy it even more if you do that. And we're gonna talk about more about another one of Toni Morrison's books later. But yeah, The Bluest Eye I feel like is a good introduction to Toni Morrison's work. So now we're moving into intermediate. And this is, for one reason or another, I found these books to be slightly more complicated than the introductory level. Not necessarily by a huge amount. And this also could be in regards to the writing itself. Maybe the book is a little bit older and therefore more separated from our modern time period, so it could be a little bit difficult to understand given that we don't use a lot of those words anymore, you know what I'm saying? Or maybe it's the content and the literary analysis that you're going to be taking away from that book. And so the first book that I want to talk to you guys about in the intermediate category is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. This book is one of my favorite classics that I have read to date, and I feel like there are multiple reasons for that, but one of them is this book has some magical realism in it, and it explores magical realism in a way that I hadn't seen done in other classics before. And the reason that I decided to put this book in the intermediate category is we are following a family, we're following the Trueba family, but we're not just looking at these character dynamics and watching this family grow and change over time, you know, your usual character study story. No, we're watching the Trueba family through 4 different generations. So in the first generation, we're starting out with Clara. She is clairvoyant, hence the magical realism element of this story. And we're looking at her, but by the end of the book, we've literally made our way through multiple generations of the family, and there are many repeats of names, and that was very confusing for me. But the writing is very lyrical, it's very poetic, but there are a lot of scenes and content warnings to be looked at before looking into this book. Honestly, with any classic, you might want to check those things beforehand, but this is a very beautiful story, and I feel like it's very different than other classics that I've read. All right, besties, I had to put a Jane Austen in this list. Otherwise, some people were gonna come for me in the comment section down below. And so the next book that I have to recommend for the intermediate category is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was my first Jane Austen book, and I really, really enjoyed it. And this book follows Elizabeth Bennet in 19th century England, and you know, she is a very strong, independent character who knows what she wants. And at one point or another, or multiple or many in this book, she, you know, we'll say she butts heads with none other than Mr. Darcy. I feel like Jane Austen does a really good job exploring the expectations that are put on women in this book while maintaining a very strong female character. And a lot of people just absolutely love this dynamic that you watch between between Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy. It's truly like the OG enemies to lovers if you're looking for that. So yeah, this is a really, really good one. And the reason that I decided to put it in this intermediate category is because the writing is pretty different from what you read in a modern book. The writing style and vocabulary are a bit different, so I find that you have to kind of turn on that side of your brain because there are going to be things that might not make sense immediately, but the more you read, you can contextualize all those new words, and it's not actually so bad. You just kind of have to let your brain switch gears and get ready to read some beautiful, lyrical, romantic Jane Austen writing. All right, besties, now we're gonna start spilling some tea. We've got some drama-filled books, and the first one that I'm gonna be sharing with you guys is The Scarlet Letter by none other than Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the story of The Scarlet Letter, we are following Hester Prynne. Basically, Hester gets pregnant with an illegitimate child. And at this time, it's 17th century New England. Everyone's like, girl, you are the embodiment of sin. You have committed a crime. You should feel deep and intense humiliation for what you've done. And Hester, in an attempt to protect her child, is not revealing any information about the father. And so she has to wear the Scarlet Letter. She has to wear an A on her chest to represent the adultery that she has committed. And we follow her as she essentially goes about her days wearing this symbol of sin on her chest every single day. And it's a very, very interesting story, and it's not too difficult to understand. And I actually remember distinctly reading this book on Valentine's Day like 2 or 3 years ago. It was crazy. I will never forget that experience. The next book that I want to recommend for this intermediate category is Ethan Frome by none other than Edith Wharton. And I had no idea. I actually just read another book by Edith Wharton that I'm not including on this list, but I had no idea that she wrote Ethan Frome. So this was kind of a little mind explosion moment for me. Ethan Frome, where do I even begin? Ethan Frome, he is a character. He is a character. And he is in this marriage, but I would not say that this marriage is filled with love. Wouldn't say that at all. His wife is sick, and at the beginning of the book, his wife's cousin enters the chat, okay? And he starts to get a little bit infatuated with his sickly wife's cousin. Guys, spilling tea right now. And so he finds himself very drawn to her kindness, her warmth, and we're basically following him as he experiences this like forbidden attraction. And I will say this, there are so many phallic symbols in this book, it is actually ridiculous. I will never look at a cucumber the same, ever. Okay, like just thinking about it is making me blush a little bit. Like this, something else. And Wharton, our author, she is so good at these deep character studies. She knows how to write thoroughly fleshed out characters who are dealing with all these very deep, like this deep inner turmoil. I don't even know how to describe it, but she is a character artist. So if you're into that, I would pick this one up. Then lastly, but certainly not least, we have for this intermediate category, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Now, if you are looking for something really, really enthralling, something that's gonna keep your attention, a little edge of your seat moment, this is not the book to pick up. A lot of people, their criticism with The Grapes of Wrath is nothing is happening, it's moving too slow, and I hear that, I totally understand, and this book isn't for everyone. But if you are interested in an exploration of family dynamics and siblings as they undergo this journey from Oklahoma to California during the Great Depression, if that sounds interesting to you, I would pick this one up. In this book, we are following the Joad family as they are quite literally forced to get out of where they live in, I believe, Oklahoma in hopes of a better life in California. But this journey, again, we are following them as they move from point A to point B. So if you really like those books where your characters are on a journey or where you are is constantly changing, I would recommend this book. And there are 4 Joad siblings, and you really take a very close look at each one of them. They're very, very different people. And again, I feel like this is a really good character study. It's great for people who like books that are constantly moving, constantly changing scenes. But again, it's not that exciting. Like if you're not interested in reading literal pages and paragraphs about like a tortoise, you're just a tortoise like walking across the road, hanging out, this is not gonna be the one for you. I just don't want anyone to walk away feeling like they got the wrong impression, okay? And finally, we are making our way into the expert category. So if you're like, Olivia, lay it on thick. Let me know what you think are difficult classics to read, to understand. You want all the juiciness, all the complicated vocabulary and difficult things. We're gonna talk about it. I'm gonna give it to you right here, right now. Now again, this expert category could either be it was very difficult functionally for me to understand, or it's very difficult to take a lot away from it unless you do your reading afterwards, okay? And the first book that we're gonna be talking about is of the latter sort. And that book is Beloved by none other than Toni Morrison. We have another Toni Morrison book on this list. You may or may not see that I am a fan of hers. I am, in fact, a Toni Morrison stan. Beloved is a very, very interesting story. We are following our main character, Setha, who is either an escaped slave or she bought her freedom. I don't remember the exact details or nuances in that respect, but she at one point was a slave, and this book takes place during post-Civil War, And she is the embodiment of a mother who wants to protect her children. We're very, very closely looking at this idea of motherhood and how far you will go to protect your children. And at the beginning of the book, this girl appears out of nowhere, kind of, named Beloved. And Beloved brings back a lot of memories for Setha, and it really shakes things up in the home. And I don't think this book is very difficult to understand when you read it. I think you will generally understand the plot, the characters. However, there is so much more to this book than what's on the page. I feel like to take away as much as you can, looking into an analysis, reading a lot about our author, Toni Morrison, is so valuable for what you take away as a reader. Something as simple as an address. The address on Setha's home is 124, and there is a very, very specific reason that the 3 in that address is gone. And again, I'm not gonna say any of the analyses right now because I don't wanna go and give you spoilers, but even just that, like, look into that. Little things that Morrison does are more than intentional, and I found it so poetic and heartbreaking. Toni Morrison really knows how to crack your heart in two. So this is a great one, but if you want to like give it a shot, it's not too difficult to like just understand what's going on. All right, besties, now we're switching over into the words on the page were just not comprehending in my brain for a little while. This is gonna be fun. And the next book that I have to recommend you guys is Dune by Frank Herbert. This one I do actually own. I read a lot of classics on Kindle Unlimited and from the library, or I just read them years ago, so I don't currently have them, but this one I do have. And the reason that I'm putting this in the expert category is because you know how in a lot of fantasy books or sci-fi books, there's world building going on. You know, they'll kind of tell you the fantasy world that you're living in, the sci-fi politics. No, in this book, there is no world building. The world is already built. She's done. And Frank Herbert does not walk you through it. He doesn't explain literally anything to you. I think the only way that I can describe it to you is at the back of this book, there is an index called The Terminology of the Imperium. And what you are expected to do is when you encounter a new word, it's not because you just don't know that word, it's because Frank Herbert made it up. And so what you need to do is go through and flip through the terminology of the Imperium and find said word. My camera literally just told me that it stopped recording because the max recording time had been reached. That is so awkward and embarrassing. Basically, you need to teach yourself the world in here. And for about 150 pages, I was extremely confused reading this book. And you do catch up on, like, you do start to figure it out, pick up on the story and the world as you make your way through it. But just know there's a lot of work that you need to do as the reader to understand this world. This, I will say, this beautiful and intricate and encapsulating world that Frank Herbert was able to build. And in this story, really quickly, we are following the Atreides family, and they have basically been given possession or like leadership to this planet that is home to the most valuable substance in the universe. And there's a lot of politics that come with managing that substance, and so you watch them as they like lead and regulate this substance. Next up, we have one of my all-time favorite classics ever. I read this in college just for funsies, and I still think about it to this day. And that book is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. I don't know exactly why I love this book so much. I think it has to do with the fact that this is a King Arthur retelling, and I love anything King Arthur for some reason. Actually, if you guys have any King Arthur related book recs, let me know in the comment section down below, because I could really do with more of that in my life. But The Once and Future King is a beautiful classic that's broken up into 4 smaller books. And in each of these books, we're following somewhat of different things. And in, I think it's the first book, we're following Wart, who ultimately grows up to become King Arthur, yeah, you know, you guys know the story. But Wart has to learn a lot of lessons along the way. He encounters many iconic characters, including Merlin, Guinevere, Lancelot, all of that is in here. And the reason that I'm putting this in the expert category is because our characters, there's quite a few characters to keep track of. This book is also extremely long and the pages are like so thin. And the vocab is a little complicated. It's not too bad in my opinion, but it is a little more on the complicated side. And so I feel like just, you know, committing to reading 650 pages of older style writing with quite a few characters and different books, I feel like for a lot of people, this is not where you would want to start with classics at all. But that said, I loved it. I like laughed. I felt like the characters were so fun. I love this classic and definitely wouldn't recommend for beginners, but if you feel like you have a handle on classics and you're into King Arthur, dude, check this out. Last but certainly not least, not only in the expert category, but in this video, I want to recommend, I had to pick a Shakespeare, guys. I had to. And there were a few that I was considering recommending, but the one that I decided to go with is Hamlet, again, by none other than William Shakespeare. Now, again, there are a few reasons to put William Shakespeare's books in, or plays in this category of the video. The first one being that Shakespeare literally created like his own way of writing, and the vocab and words and terminology that he's using are not at all similar to the way that we speak today. He quite literally writes in iambic pentameter where there is different emphasis on like every other syllable. It is impressive what this guy was able to do and create and accomplish. But because it's a play, because the writing is so vastly different from what we understand today, there's a lot of reasons that I decided to put this in the expert category. But Hamlet, this story, we're following our main character again, Hamlet. Have you guys noticed a trend in this video? Yeah, because I have. A lot of titular characters to talk about. Hamlet, his dad dies, and it's pretty shocking. And he's kind of like taken aback because then his mom goes and marries his uncle. And he's like, whoa, my family's falling apart. And it kind of drives him to become another version of himself. There's a bit of a mystery going on. There's a bit of a romance. Well, is romance the right word? I don't know. But this is in every way a Shakespearean tragedy. And I really enjoyed this one. I feel like I haven't read a ton of Shakespeare. I've read maybe 3 or 4 of his plays. This is one that definitely stands out to me. I really enjoyed this book, but without the help of the internet, I would not be able to read these books just like as they are and take as much away from them. So yeah, I feel like it goes without saying, but anything by Shakespeare, I would put it in this category. Okay, besties, as you saw, the camera literally forced me to stop speaking because I've been going on and on about classics. I am going to be doing another video in this series, part 2 and probably a part 3 of different classics for different levels. If you guys have any classics recommendations for me, please leave them in the comment section down below. I read 2 classics this month and I have 2 planned for the month of October. They are going to be spooky classics, if that is any hint to anybody. And I think that's gonna be all from me. Real quick, I wanna give a shout out to some of my lovely, beautiful subscribers who are so sweet and kind and supportive. Thank you all for being here. I'm so grateful for every single one of you. And I think that's gonna be it from me today. I hope you guys are having a lovely day and a lovely reading month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.